You're listening to 107.9 FM, WRML LP Mays Landing. Coming up next, a look at this week's retro video game news on the RGN Files for the week ending Sunday, February 11, 2018. In the RGN Files this week, one of the questions that has had video gamers scratching their heads since 1985 has finally been answered. Is Toad wearing a hat, or is his mushroom cap actually a part of his head? In a recent question and answer session with Toad's creator Toshiaki Koizumi, this 3-decade-old question has finally been confirmed. Koizumi states that the mushroom cap at the top of Toad's head is actually a part of his head and not a hat. This is, of course, a contradiction of a specific event from the past. In an episode of the Super Mario Bros. Super Show from the late 1980s, Toad is shown removing his headgear, or so we thought. Koizumi stated, quote, "So that, as it turns out, is actually Toad's head. I'm going to have to leave it all up to you to figure out exactly how that works out," end quote. With that question now finally answered, gamers now want to know if Toad was really giving an obscene gesture in the original Super Mario Bros. From 1985. Over the past week, we at Retro Game Network shared many stories in regards to ROM hacks and homebrew titles. In ROM hack news this week, a brand new experience in the NES title Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link has been released, called The Nightmare of Ganon. ROMHacking.net member Hollow Shadow, who programmed the alteration, stated that his goal was to make a hard-type Zelda 2 ROM hack with a completely different design and a new story. Along with a brand new storyline, the game also includes enemy respawning, a larger overworld, deeper palaces, and longer bridges and caves. All these features make the game electronically more difficult. Version 1.1 of the hack fixes typos of the name Ganon and a fix of the area prior to Death Mountain. You can now also restart a palace in the event of a game over. In order to use the hack, you will need an NES emulator, along with a copy of the Zelda 2 ROM image and the hack file. This ROM hack has been successfully tested with the EverDrive series of cartridges. In addition, a second ROM hack was released last week, which is a modification of the NES classic Super Mario Bros. 3. Super Mario Ultimate, created by a person who calls himself Silas, renovated the legendary game not just as a simple programming change, but rather as a complete hack of one of the most critically acclaimed video games that take place in the Mushroom Kingdom. It features a total of 8 brand new worlds, over 80 new and original levels, fresh graphics and sprites, new enemy characters, difficulty selection, as well as a save state opportunity. To run the hack, you must have an NES emulator alongside of the Super Mario Bros. 3 Program 0 ROM of the original game title to apply the hack onto. A patching program such as Beat or Floating IPS may also be necessary as well. This ROM hack has not yet been tested with flash drives such as the EverDrive series of cartridges. In homebrew video game news this week, a new Commodore Amiga title that has been in the works since October of 2016 has finally received an update. In a YouTube video uploaded by Sterile707, the programmer shows the recent progress that has been accomplished in recent months for the upcoming shoot-'em-up game entitled Invia. The space shooter has been inspired by such other games as R-Type. According to the developer, the game started as a personal design exercise. This update brings the game music, sound effects, and also runs at 50 frames per second. The video uploaded to YouTube shows the game running on actual Amiga equipment, and currently the title would require an Amiga 500 alongside a 512K of RAM and kickstart versions 1.3 through 3.1. There is currently no word on when the game would officially be completed, nor has any distribution methods been discussed at this time. And finally this week, a brand new homebrew title has come out that has a special interest for our friends from across the pond. A game called Impossibubble was released for the cult classic ZX Spectrum computer, a big video gaming computer system over in the United Kingdom. The game was released by programmer and graphical artist Dave Clark, alongside of David Safier, who composed the music. Being released under Monument Microgames, Impossibubble is Clark's very first title to get an official release by the company, which releases games not just for the Spectrum, but for the ZX81, known here in the US as the Timex Sinclair, as well as Next computer systems. The game is currently available as a digital download for the cost of just $1.49. The digital download can be used on a ZX Spectrum emulator, but there is currently no word on when the physical cassette-based medium release would be available, nor has any pricing for this release been made public. That's it for this week's edition of the RGN Files. For those of you listening on VGM on FM, please stay tuned. There'll be more great retro video game music coming up shortly. For those of you listening on RetroGameNetwork.com, we thank you for listening and hope you'll tune in again next time. Be sure to check out RetroGameNetwork.com for full information of any of this week's stories. For the Retro Game Network, the RGN Files, and VGM on FM, I'm Christopher Chrisman. This week's news story is provided by the following: the English Amiga board, Indie Retro News, Nintendo of Japan, Polygon, ROMHacking.net, Vintage is the New Old. You're listening to VGM on FM on 107.9 WRML. Now, back to the music.